Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Case for Analytics webinar, How to Use Advanced Data Analytics and Technology to Combat Financial Crime. My name is Beverly, and I'll be your moderator for this event. I'm joined today by our guest speaker, Mr. Mike Collusion, a Senior Solutions Architect and Team Lead at Case for Analytics. He holds over 10 years of experience in the banking industry, working in fraud, risk management, and project management. Mike also performs business process risk assessments worldwide, designs customized solutions for private and public sector clients, specializing in AML, regulatory reporting, and internal controls monitoring. Now, before I hand the presentation over to Mike, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items, of which I'm sure you're familiar. Everyone on the webinar has been muted. If you have any questions, type them into the question box in the webinar control panel to the right on your screen. If your question is not addressed in the webinar, either our presenter or a member of the Caseware team will respond to you via email. And lastly, the slides and video from this webinar will be made available to you after the webinar. And so with that introduction, Mike, I'll turn the event over to you.
Thank you very much, Beverly. It's greatly appreciated. Hi, everyone. Today what we wanted to do was to give you guys a chance of better understanding how you can improve and combat, actually how you can improve your financial crimes platform, and by leveraging advanced analytics as well as just technology in general. So what can we do to take MSBs from a manual process to an automated process as quickly and effectively as possible, right? And how do we have the ability to better understand how the regulatory environment out there is actually transforming and evolving as it gets more and more popular? We'll ensure that we could also give you guys a quick overview, better understand some fines and penalties that are out there, as well as challenges that we've seen throughout the market and consistent challenges in most of our customers as well as we continue to progress. So the market, as we know, is growing every day. Worldwide, over 230 million people. You know, they're sending over $500 billion of remittance each year. I'm sure you guys know this quite well, whether it's through Western Union, MoneyGram, RIA, or other potential MSB providers out there as well. And one of the biggest emerging markets out there right now that we see, you know, you're looking at mobile money, you're looking at Google Pay, the procure to pay process in general, you're looking at cryptocurrencies, social media applications and capabilities for purchases through there, right? Everything is starting to become online more and more, and indirectly anonymous as well as you progress. It's very hard to start to validate certain information and ensure as well that you go through the proper enhanced due diligence, so to speak, that it is the right person creating these particular accounts, so on and so forth. One of the main pillars that we tend to leverage, that BSA always does as well, is you have four main pillars that allow you to better understand how your environment can be created in a sustainable fashion. So when looking at your compliance officers, ensuring that they have the right education and training, that they are consistently updated, that these compliance officers better understand how it works as a whole, how it's affecting their particular industry as well. Because a compliance team, when looking at particular retail stores or electronic payroll, has complete different objectives of how they want to succeed with the regulatory bodies. Ensuring that your internal policies and procedures are always up to date. And this is something that we tend to see consistently throughout the market as well, is where policies tend to be created when everything was initially set in place, and they tend to kind of fall off the wayside of validating, is this policy, procedure, and control up to date compared to my current environment, and ensuring that we have the ability to evolve that as you progress. And of course, independent reviews for compliance is always out there, whether it's the FinCEN or IRS that's doing these particular reviews as well. Here's just a quick overview of particular fines and penalties that are coming through, whether it's the $25 million for civil money penalty against American Express. You also have against Thomson Hayter the Chief Compliance Officer and Senior Vice President of the Government Affairs at MoneyGram. And of course, you can see the $700,000, right? That was MSBs selling its virtual currency without registering through FinCEN. And a lot of times through the MSBs, we're starting to see more and more common crimes, right? Everything is about a trend. Everything is about having the ability to identify what's actually happening out there in a consistent manner, so that when you do see potential trends or patterns, you can ensure to identify them consistently and reoccurringly. So whether it's human smuggling, you're looking at narcotics trafficking, terrorist financing, elder abuse, mail order brides, heavenly offerings, right? All of these particular items are very, very popular crimes that we continue to see. And you can notice as well that this information came back from 2009 and it still hasn't changed. These are still your top crimes that are still happening out there. And the challenges that people are actually having as we speak is going through ensuring that you have the ability to report these filing requirements accordingly. So whether it's validating everything manually, right? Having the appropriate staff, not just the right number of staff, but ensuring that they know exactly how to fill out these reports and file them accordingly. Having the ability to identify the issues that are out there as well, right? It's very hard when starting to do manual investigations to actually be able to have stringent filing capabilities and these margins. So your profit margins tend to fall off the wayside when you're handling all of these regulatory reports in a manual form, as well as when you start doing it manually, you have the potential data quality issues, right? So you are risking potential manual errors or human errors, so to speak, as well as when it should have been actually filed compared to when someone makes a decision of not filing. And then there's, of course, the de-risking capabilities. So what do we do, right? Now that we understand all of these challenges, how do we then figure out what does a successful program actually entail? What are the different elements that I'm actually going to need to ensure that I create a great AML program for this, right? So ensuring that you have appropriate governance, right, throughout. Up-to-date training, whether it's not just for your compliance officers, but everyone that might be affected throughout the entire organization. Making sure that you're on top of your risk management capabilities, mitigating as much risk as possible, and doing this on a yearly basis. I would even say quarterly basis to validate the information. There are many companies right now that consistently do this on a monthly basis. And when they start to leverage the technologies, they would have the ability not only to do it on a quarterly, yearly, or monthly basis, but we can even help you guys do it on a daily basis as we continue to go forward. And ensuring that everyone has that buy-in, right? That you're creating the right state of mind and the right culture, that everyone really believes in what you're trying to put out there. All of the controls and compliance procedures that are in place, you have to ensure that your employees truly believe in it. And when they believe in it, they will then ensure to back you up and take it seriously. So it removes that potential concern as well. So what does the role of a technology actually do, right? How can a technology actually help you? What we tried to do was create particular assets, so to speak, within a technology and ensuring that it has these functionalities at all times to help you through your process from end to end. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're getting clear and concise metrics and reports on, hey, how many SARs did I actually file in the last 24 hours, in the last month, in the last week? How many CTRs were actually filed if need be, or STRs, so on and so forth? What were the different regulators that they were actually sent to, right? So if I'm a electronic payroll, am I actually sending or filing for the UK, for Canada, and for the US as I'm progressing? ensuring that there's a risk and controls framework capability within this system as well, so that when you're actually setting up and looking at your particular compliance program and how all of these risks and activities are portrayed, you have to ensure that the system can mimic that and adapt to what you guys are doing, right? And ensuring that the data analytics will help automate all of the information. So we'll validate those controls for you as quickly and effectively as possible. And the data discovery is huge on better understanding visually, right, what's actually happening out there right now. What are the potential root causes? Is it, what are the top 10 locations that I've got SARs or CTRs? I can even potentially identify if there's collusion that's occurring at any point in time as well, right? And ensuring that my due diligence continues to happen for particular requirements. On a threshold of, say, $3,000, was there actually ID that was processed? Sometimes the system, of course, forces you to do so. Is that ID actually legitimate? So on and so forth. And of course, when you're gathering all the info from your risks and controls framework, your analytics, your discovery, you want to ensure that you better understand the right insights, whether it's having the capability to do risk profiling on certain stores or locations, right? So based on all the activity that's happening, on the profile risk that's being occurred for that particular location, the activity risk score that's being brought forth for that actual location, as well as the relationships that are occurring. So is there a trend on people being linked together that are actually always going to a single location? And once you have all of those insights, you have to ensure that your tool can allow you to actually get what we call a case management point of view. I don't want to have to deal with a single transaction at a time, right? I want to be able to see everything at a high level, all of the activity. Give me one clear picture on exactly what's going on with this particular person. A lot of people say, well, that's very hard to do because in the MSB world, there are no actual IDs. There are no client customer registrations, right? So the technology also has to help you do that. You have to have the capability to start to create, whether it's a virtual client identifier or a unique client ID as you progress through. There are multiple different ways to do that. We'll give you some tips on how to. When looking at the case management as well and the remediation process, we call a workflow, right? So you have to be able to have an appropriate workflow to allow you to remediate this process effectively, consistently, and efficiently, right? So your workflow has to be flexible, has to adhere to how you take care of not just one particular issue, but many issues. Workflows have to combine multiple different departments, if need be, multiple different roles, right? So an example here where the item actually goes under assignment. I'm now investigating this case, right? It's assigned to myself. I'm starting to take a look. I see that Mike Kaluri is showing up in potential structuring and smurfing. He's gone to even store jumping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send it to gather additional information. Why? Because there are potential printouts or any manual documents that were actually, that they received, so on and so forth. I'd love to get copies of those. So what do? Well, I have the ability to send this case over as a task to this retail manager. This store manager will then attach all of the particular files or copies of the files that were completed, right? And then send it back to me for final review. So he has the ability to either send it to me for a confirmed match, or he's stating after that he wants to release it. It all depends on what the outcome is going to be. However, it's not the store manager that has the ability to make that decision, right? It's the compliance officer. Here's a quick little overview as well of when you're looking at the remediation process and looking at an automated capability. We now go back to, hey, what would happen if I actually started to take advantage of all of this automation? And what we put together was just a quick overview of a manual process and what that would look like and how much effort it takes for a team to be able to fill out CTRs and SARs. Now, this is not just filling out the form itself. This includes completing the investigation, gathering the information from potential different sources, right? So when we say an hour and a half per report, it's not just an hour and a half to fill out that SAR or that CTR. It's all of the effort that actually has to go into ensuring that the investigation is complete and concise and added throughout, right? So that's what looks like manually. So if you're looking at this particular item here at 300 CTRs or SARs and an hour and a half per report, that's 450 hours that were spent in reporting, right? That's a staff of 3 full-time for that month. Imagine if you could have all of this taken care of and you could actually drop this down to 70 to 80%. Imagine if you had the ability to leverage your automated system and actually say, hey, you know what? 450 hours, we've now been able to turn around and drop that down to 90 hours a month to take care of all of the actual reporting that we were doing before. Those are the types of matrices that you should be looking at. That's the line you should be drawing in the sand and ensuring that your system has the ability to automate these particular areas. So whether it's detecting the reportable transactions, ensuring to aggregate all of the data from the different sources for you, right? Completing that report, so actually filling out and automatically filling out that info for you directly, ensuring that it could also validate those requirements. So not just filling out the form, but if I had a form that was filled out and I could say, hey, this is a US FinCEN SAR, I'd actually want to click validate and verify it was able to double check all of those rules and regulations and actually ensure that I could then turn around and submit successfully. So I don't have that concern anymore of what was actually submitted will actually be accepted by FinCEN. And how could I actually submit not just a single SAR at a time, but imagine if I could do batch filing, right? So ensure that the system could create a batch of SARs. So an entire team comes together, starts to validate all of these auto SARs that were created, as well as potentially creating manual SARs and automatic CTRs. And come the end of the day, the submission just goes directly to FinCEN. Everything gets confirmed. FinCEN sends back a reply, and you have all the information for acceptance of all of these SARs and CTRs, also ensuring that any evidence is automatically attached. So there are situations where if you're filling out a SAR and you want to attach 30 days, the last 30 days of activity for this particular subject, imagine if that also occurred automatically. Your narrative was filled out automatically. Wonderful thing. And one of the biggest elements that has the ability to put this together as well for the system is the analytics, right? Having the ability to bring together all of this data crunching and data mining through the analytics. And you always have to ensure that you follow these 4 steps, ensuring that you have the correct data, right? Making sure that once you have the correct data, that it's accurate, that you're pushing through that right data, that you're choosing the right analytics that have the highest potential risk to mitigate all of those risks and controls. And ensuring that your insights that you're monitoring always connect to those activities and controls. And then once you do that with these strong analytics, they will realize the value for you. Your ROI, not just in time saving, but in findings and reputational savings, as well as ensuring that you won't have any fines, and easier to handle IRS as well with these proper analytics and information. So what are the data challenges that we run into, right? If you remember, the first thing that we were talking about for the data analytics is getting the data right. The challenges that we tend to see in consistency is existence and completeness of the data. So whether it's APRIS, whether it's MoneyGram or Western Union that is sending you this information, or that you guys are downloading on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, there are many times that all of a sudden the schema changed. What's going on? Why did they change the schema from one month to another? Or why does it feel like certain records are missing or they're incomplete records, right? So you always have to ensure that when looking at your actual data, that it has proper completeness, that you can actually validate it, and that it's accurate. Now, how can you do that? What are the tools that you can start to leverage to mitigate all of these data challenges to the best of your ability? Right, so what we wanted to do is now start to help you kind of better understand how to help your data quality and help mitigate all of these challenges, right? So when you're going through the data quality management process, or what we like to call it, the refinement process, there's 3 easy steps that are standard for best practices for us, right? So first thing right away, you're going to go through the parsing capability, then standardizing, and what we call a fuzzy matching to basically identify what we call a best breed record. And here are some examples of that actually. So when I look at the information here, you can see at the top, so the source data being provided to me is 234 Leader Avenue, Denver, Colorado. And what we do is we parse each particular field out to ensure that we can identify how each particular field has the information within each field. How accurate is it? And what is the best way to standardize it? So you can see how leader is written a little bit wrong. The house number is missing on the 3rd one. Street, avenue as we progress. Zip code is missing throughout, so on and so forth. And when we start to actually standardize the info, you can see how it's breaking down much, much cleaner. So we notice that, hey, the best breed of information, if we started to break out and fix this. So instead of street, it's avenue. Avenue is written properly. Leader is written properly. The zip code is brought forth. And what does this do? This allows us to then create a best of breed record. We understand that creating this type of information at times can be hard. However, when you have access to pulling in historical information, and start to leverage an asset called virtual customer identification creation, you could start to create a best breed record and actually start to link a unique identifier to this customer. So now everyone coming in to do these particular transactions at one point or another, when gathered this information, we can then start to break down and identify, hey, what's the certainty percentage for this? And what should the best breed or the golden record actually exist? And then based on that, you then start to add that virtual ID for them. So whether you're leveraging the fuzzy match or going through these 3 steps, parse, standardize, identify the best breed. When leveraging your fuzzy match, then add that unique identifier, then see what are the other transactions that exist that I could add that unique identifier to. And by doing so, will actually then allow you to start to correlate this particular client or person into multiple different situations, and also start to cross-correlate all of the different analytics that are actually being processed. In doing so, you're always ensuring, right, you go back to your risk and controls matrix, right? What is the actual risk assessment that should be processed? How should I be doing this risk assessment workshop? What are the control weaknesses that I have? How do I ensure that once I've gone through that process, I know exactly what to monitor, the frequency of actually monitoring these risks for these analytics as well, right? And ensuring that you're always identifying your highest risks and capabilities and your weak points, and start with those at any point. Now, once we've actually identified the virtual identifier and we've looked at our risk assessment, we then start to go into particular analytics. And the scenarios for these analytics are very consistent throughout the industry, right? So what we did was we wanted to give you guys a hand up on it. We wanted to actually break out a nice list of particular very, very popular scenarios that really, really help tighten your compliance program together, right? And really, really, once you have these analytics in place and they're validating these particular scenarios, it really covers a lot and ensures that you're gaining control and automating quickly and effectively. So what we're going to do now is you can kind of give you guys some time to read each particular description, but I actually wanted to go and start giving examples as well of each particular scenario throughout. So let's start with structuring, right? There are many different ways on how to structure these transactions to avoid having a CTR being filled out, right? So whether it's multiple transactions by customer across different locations, even at the same location, if they're going to the same location and breaking it out on the same day, so individually below threshold, right? And one of the things that you want to ensure, right, that you can catch this as well is right here. We like to give you a couple hints. So make sure that to reduce false positive, you're excluding any PO boxes, any blanks or invalid addresses. Try to leverage the CVID capability if you can, and also have a time period to review, right? Why is that time period so important? Is because we've always seen this as well, is not only are they actually potentially structuring on the same day in multiple locations, but there's also times where multiple transactions are occurring in the same location but multiple days. So yes, this wouldn't warrant a CTR, but this indeed warrants a SAR, right, and identification of it. When looking at smurfing, where you multiple transactions by multiple customers across multiple locations are basically, they're funneling into one particular person. So individually below threshold, of course, and when it's an aggregate amount, it then shows up above threshold. And of course, it may be the same recipient. Most of the time, it is, or it's a group of recipients, depending on where it's being sent. So you always have to ensure that you correlate the receiver or the receiver's information for a network analysis to start to follow the flow of the money and where it goes. And always ensure that you can isolate all of the suspects that are in this and see, is there any link between them as well for any potential other activity, i.e. moving into flipping. So whether the person's receiving it and then quickly resends, whether they're holding a fee of that amount, or is it going through multiple steps and layers as well. Here, of course, we show you something very simple. But we've seen times where there's money being flipped to 8, 10, 12 different people. And once you start to really follow that trail and really start to pay attention to it as well. So always ensure that you have a timeline in place, because you could go down that rabbit hole for quite some time. Make sure that you can actually distinguish between what is a fee and what is a true flip, right? And then it potentially examines the outbounds and the inbounds, because if someone's just receiving, that's not a true flip. So you always have to ensure that you can start from something. And but we come in with these mules, so sending money and receiving to the same location. Strangely enough, believe it or not, we caught this on tape where there was 2 guys. Why they were doing this, we still couldn't understand. We were never given an explanation, but we had one gentleman who, was in line. He sent money, came around, and 3 people behind him was the person picking up that money. Right? It was the strangest thing we had ever seen. And there are times as well that you want to look at particular limits for these locations. It might actually be at the same location at any point in time. There are even people that have sent money to themselves and moved locations as well, right? And this is, again, where we break down what we were talking about before. So if you remember, we were looking at following the money throughout. What is the network that's actually happening out there? So make sure that you could actually understand the layering of the evidence, right? So cross-correlate your smurfing, your flipping, your mules, your elderly abuse, so on and so forth. Start to cross-correlate that information and bring it together so that you can really start to see the ring or the organization that's actually happening throughout. This will allow you to see what we call a hierarchy point of view of the implication, and better make a decision as well on what should I do next? What type of SAR or narrative should be added to this as we progress? And of course, multiple customers at the same address is huge. We see that consistently. Always ensure that you can identify if it's also an apartment building. Again, exclude your PO boxes, valid addresses, but also look at the prioritization of how many persons or people are actually happening within one single residence. Reason being, so if you are only looking at, if there's 3 or more, I would suggest you start looking at maybe 5 or 6 or more in the same location, just to start. Then once you get a handle on that information, you get a handle on reviewing those and investigating those cases, you can make a decision on how to parameterize, whether I want to lower it to a 4 or 3, or even elevate it to 6 if need be. And then there's a single customer with multiple addresses seen consistently, whether they're coming in with multiple IDs as well. And remember the CV ID that we were talking about before, right? So that CV ID, when putting it in place, it should also have the ability to not just sustain addresses, but ID numbers. So when I have this particular ID number with this address, I also want to be able to attach maybe up to 10 different IDs, whether it's a driver's license, whether it's a passport, so on and so forth, because many people, that's what they're doing nowadays, right? They'll turn around and show their driver's license to the same location, and the same day in the afternoon, they'll then show their passport, and they think they're smart because they're not going to be caught by Western Union or so on and so forth because they use different ID numbers. Well, you have to ensure that your technology has the ability to identify that and aggregate those amounts as well for you. We're also looking at inherently risky places, whether it's a risky country or even locations, right? So again, hierarchy point of view, 1, looking at particular risk locations, looking at high value locations as well, and then cross-correlating against potential high-risk countries. So identifying where the FATF website can actually help you better understand potential high-risk countries. It's a great site, guys. Please take the time to go see it. Leverage it as well in your compliance verification. We use it consistently. It's a great little tool. And there's the elderly abuse, right? So again, free transfers from elderly abuse, it really is higher risks. Correlate it with other activity as well and see for particular locations. So where is this happening more and more? Is it popular in certain areas? Because you'll start to see a trend, as well as ensure that you could look at what is the sex, if you have the ability to gain access to that, that's being affected, as well as the age. So have the ability to even have a parameter connected to the age variance, and pay attention to the correlation of the age and the locations. That will help you a lot to start to identify trends as well. For NGOs, charities, and religions, it's something that's out there. We see it consistently. Please don't always pay attention to these. It's coming more and more now that they're actually sadly using this as a comment or an area that the reason why the money is being sent, so on and so forth. I know it gets very tricky and it can be hard at times, but if you have the right technology, it'll be able to actually weed out what is real, what is not, and what should really be investigated at any point in time. And of course, collusion detection is something outside of analytics that can also help you, whether it's your rules-based analytics and correlating them to start to see a pattern of a particular location or employee, right? That they're accepting falsified addresses, that they're actually entering it, or even falsified documentation. We once saw a recording of a gentleman standing in front of the employee and actually going through 5 or 6 different driver's licenses right in front of them and just basically grabbed one and gave it to them. I was like, here you go, right? So under normal circumstances, we would hope that the employee would then advise of creation of a store alert or just decline the transaction outright based on that information. And we understand that there's also the factor of fear, so the transaction might still be processed, but at least let someone know, right, at any point in time. And also verifying for potential duplicate IDs. So is the same ID number actually coming up with multiple people? Is the same social security number or social insurance number, depending on where you are, what country you're in, coming up as well? We have the ability as well to ensure that the system can validate these potential ID numbers or social security numbers, right? There is technology out there that can actually validate these licenses behind the scenes and start to identify and let you know of potential trends if they continue to be invalid, right? We're leveraging the insights of all that information, right? Again, I come back to it again. What is the best locations? Highest amount of SARS, highest amount of CTRs, highest volume, highest number of investigations that are occurring. What's the frequency of these items as well? Is it a particular day of the week? How many days a week does it actually happen? Is it for a particular person that is working there, a particular cashier or agent that's actually involved as well? And what are the controls that are failing to actually let this continue to happen? Is there a way for us to actually tighten our controls to ensure that we can mitigate this at any point in time? And the best way to actually be able to mitigate your controls is to better understand what your root cause is all about, as well as ensuring that you put in the proper actions, right? So if I'm not taking the time to actually better understand why this is happening and how I can mitigate it, just by doing a simple fix is just going to be a little band-aid, right? We don't want to do that. We want to better understand, hey, why is this structuring actually happening? Who, what, where, when, why? What can I actually do about it? What are the actions I can take? How can I mitigate this as best as possible, right? Ensuring as well that when looking at your rules-based analytics, right? So we looked at all the rules-based analytics, we had the outcomes and scenarios. We then start to look at how to mitigate particular risks and break through of the root causes. So what's the next step after that? What's the evolution of ensuring rules-based, everything else? How can I take it further? And looking at potential machine learning. And that's where you get into the advanced analytic capability. Whether it's anomaly detection, linked analysis, or predictive capability for your algorithms, this is just an example of 3 particular machine learning algorithms that you can leverage, right? So what is anomaly detection? How is anomaly detection actually leveraged in this particular business? This is just a very simple example of how it can be brought forth. So what are we looking for here? Well, if I'm looking at particular people and I'm looking to profile these people that are doing transactions, so imagine that, you know, these are people between the ages of 45 and 50, and this is based on how many locations are they actually doing, what is the frequency that they're actually doing these transactions, what is the amounts, the time of day, right? Are they taking one single location or many, so on and so forth. And when we have these elements, we then start to identify trends of these people's activity and start to identify what we call the outliers, right? The people that are either doing below or above. And these are the areas that I want to start investigating. These are the tidbits of information that allows me to gain additional information in my investigation to say, hey, we see a trend between the ages of 50 and 60 years old in location A. But why is it that these particular people, these 5 or 6 different people, aren't within that trend, right? So again, using customer historical behavior. How do we do that? By leveraging that CVID, breaking out and gaining historical value and understanding. If I'm comparing one peer to another based on particular attributes, as mentioned before, whether it's the frequency of the transactions, the amounts, where they're actually going as well, right? What time of day is this happening? How many times a day? And what location or locations are actually being leveraged by these people? And ensuring that, you know, when going from an anomaly detection, it also then go back to what we were talking about before, which was network linking, network analysis capabilities, right? So using the anomalies detected based on your historical behavior, but also ensuring that you can gain that picture of how everything ties together, right? What are all these particular people, whether it's a sender or a receiver, how do they tie together? What is the activity that's actually occurring? What are the types of transactions that they're actually doing? How much? And so on. And then once you have that info, you have all of your rules-based outputs, and then you have your machine learning algorithm outputs. You then start to look towards what we call predictive analytics as well, right? So how could I then start to use all of the historical information, all the findings that have been brought forth, the outcomes of the investigations that were completed for actually either filing a SAR or a CTR, how could I then ensure that that's going to help me? Predictive analytics does exactly that. It ensures to gather all of the outcomes of all this information and then starts to look for those particular patterns as well to ensure that you can train the models to see these predictive outcomes and identify particular fraud, as an example. So, hey, we noticed particular structuring and then it turned out to be organized crime and this fraud ring. Okay, well, based on the flow of information and the flow of money and putting all that info together, I was able to then create an appropriate predictive model to identify this situation again ahead of time. And this is just an overview of what the models would look like when merging, right, the rules-based capabilities as well as these particular machine learning models. So whether it's having the rules-based scenarios brought forth with the anomaly detection and potential predictive, I then ensure that I can actually create a resilient scoring, right, to then score this particular customer and the activity. So again, scoring under normal circumstances has three particular categories. It is your profile score, your activity score, and your relationship score. And by doing so, all right, once you have those three elements, we'll then create an overall merged score. And this allows me to then ensure that when I'm investigating a particular, whether it's a sender, a receiver, a patron, so on and so forth, that I am clear and concise about all the information being produced. And that score is a huge relevance to help me prioritize. And when you have all these models and all of these scores brought together, you also have to ensure that when you're going through your investigation, that outcome will always help balance that model. So the model adapts based on the decisions that were completed by the compliance officer as we progress. So what would you say is the big takeaways out of all this, right? So now that we've covered all of the different aspects, we wanted to give you guys some quick tips, right, as you get out there and you ensure that, hey, I want to start automating this process. We want to move away from the manual. So what are the things that I need to remember, right? So always, rewards and the risks for MSB are always huge. And ensuring that you're maintaining appropriate compliance, managing the volume of work per person, because if you're short-staffed and they're rushed, there will be potential human error. There will be things that will slide through the cracks. Ensuring that you mitigate your risks as best as possible with the right points of view and culture. Having the right analytics program and ensuring that you have the right technology in place to give you the evolution. Not just ensure that you are creating automation, but also that automation then allows you to evolve. Because as we continue to go forward, our environment continues to adapt. The perpetrators start to talk to each other. They start to better understand what we're looking for and how we're looking for it. So it's not just ensuring that your system can handle what's happening right now, but also it can handle whatever happens later. Make sure root cause analysis is a big thing. So make sure that your system can actually identify root cause to help you create cost savings and repairs and improvements on your procedures. Also, again, I can't stress this enough, this is becoming more and more popular. Based on your company, do you have cross-jurisdictional reporting capability? Is it required? Your system has to be able to handle multiple regulators, whether it's FinCEN, FinTrack, whether it's OSTRAC, so on and so forth. All right, critical at any point in time.